Hello, and welcome to yet another tier list of my draft team after a semi-successful season. I'm Zand. This is going over the UNPL Spring Fling, so a low tier meta. If you haven't seen the battles, definitely go check those out. We definitely had some highs, some lows, and I will say when I was looking back at this team, I was kind of, getting a feel of what I liked, what I didn't like. There are some big surprises in the stats for me because I did not keep up with the stats page. I don't know that there was a very accurate stats page on the actual site. And then when I went to actually record all these, I just threw them in a quick like Google Sheets. And there's some big surprises here. So I'm going to go over the kills in the regular season, playoffs if the Pokemon ever showed up in playoffs, and just thoughts on if they were good or bad. We're going to talk about the ones that were dropped first. And yeah, we're going to go for there. So don't expect a whole lot to be happening on screen. So if you want, use this as like a podcast. I'm just going to be placing things in these tiers. So we've got MVP of the season. This is one Pokemon that was our absolute best and should definitely be considered if you ever do a similar draft. We've got Amazing Would Use Again, Pokemon that really stood out to me as an absolute asset to the team and something I rarely wanted to do without. Better Than Expected is usually reserved for low tier Pokemon that you wouldn't expect to do well, and then suddenly they did really well. They did a lot better than we anticipated. We've had a few good examples of that in the past, and I feel like we have at least a couple here. Did its job, and that's it. That's kind of the mid tier. Like, we drafted it for a reason. It did what we wanted it to. It wasn't disappointing, essentially, because the next tier is slightly disappointing. So Pokemon that I drafted with something in mind and they did not meet expectations. And then we have the fraud tier, and there are at least a couple of Pokemon going here that I think is pretty funny. We're going to start with Bombirdier. It's one of the Pokemon we dropped. To me, Bombirdier was better than expected. I would be like almost willing to put it in amazing. Again, given a low tier context, this thing is never doing anything amazing in high tier. And I would say it's not going in amazing because you have to rely on inaccurate moves, and that always bothers me with Pokemon. So Bombirdier in particular, I had to rely on Rock Slide, and it missed one of the times it was crucial that it landed and put me in a really bad position in the game, and I ended up having to sack it later. Bombirdier is a really interesting Pokemon because it gets so much utility. It gets 3 really strong offensive stab typings, great spammable moves, but it's always going to be Scarf, Bandit, or Boots. Like, there's just nothing else that ever really makes sense unless you run like a Webs team or you run like specific support just for this Pokemon. Now, as a Rocks setter, it's super unique. You're never going to find another Dark Flying Rock setter, at least not as of Gen 9. So just something that has the ability to both set rocks and be a completely different Pokemon than the standard rock setter, I think makes it kind of stand out, even in standard drafts, but more so in low tier because it actually has the power and speed to do something in low tier. I had to drop it out of necessity because I needed the points elsewhere. Else, I probably wouldn't have dropped this season. It was just one of those. It was unfortunate. 3 Pokemon I wanted to drop and 2 I didn't, but I ended up having to drop all of them just to get the points required to make the moves we made. Next up, we have Clodsire. Clodsire is a fraud sire. This Pokemon is bad. I have noticed in Scarlet and Violet, both in standard and low tier, there are certain Pokemon that people specifically prep to set up and win the game off of. And Clodsire is very much one of those, if not set up on it, because obviously unaware, it's going to ignore setup, to get a sub up and just like Leech Seed it to death or in any way set a sub and just avoid taking damage. So there were countless examples, things like Steel, Terra Haunter, there's Bronzong, several Pokemon that just completely nullify this thing. It gets Body Press, it gets some other moves that can use Low Kick, but it's so weak. It only really is good at taking hits. It has negative momentum. It has no phasing, no roar, no anything. It's just not it, man. Even in low tier, I thought I could make it work in low tier as like a setup sweeper. I was really hoping I could get a curse set going. I tried it and it was bad. It was really bad. That was the only game we lost in the season, was where I relied on Clodsire. So I'm definitely feeling negative about that specifically. So yeah, I could not recommend drafting this. I'm not saying it's noob bait because I have seen it work really well for certain people, but you have to have the playstyle, the patience, and the understanding of not getting caught up using it and being too passive. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend it, but if you like it, you know, don't let me stop you. Next up, we've got Cincinno, and normally I don't do this. I should have mixed them up a little more, but Cincinno also going in the fraud tier, although a little bit above Clodsire, because I think at least we did something with it. Going back to KD, I almost forgot. Bombardier went 1-1. We brought it to 2 games before dropping it. Clodsire went 3-2 in the 2 games we brought it, because I kind of forced it to get KOs when it was brought. Normally it would not have gotten those. I think those were out of convenience, not out of its skill. And then Cincinno went 0-2 in 2 games. Missed, I think, a rock slide in both of those games. Cincinno is another Pokemon that I think looks good on paper when you're drafting and you have very limited hazard removal. And you think, oh, Cincinno got buffed. It gets Tidy Up now, which gets rid of both subs on your opponent's team and gets rid of hazards. So that's great for you, right? And not only that, it's a free Dragon Dance, and a +1 Cincinno with Skill Link and, you know, the multi-hit move of your choice can actually do something. The problem is, even in low tier in practice, it's never breaking a Pokemon at +1. Or, like, it's never breaking through frail, speedy Pokemon at +1. It's just not strong enough, and trying to get this thing in multiple times to actually clear hazards, it's so hard. It's not good, because you could Tidy Up and U-turn, waste the boost, get something else in, but then you're just taking excess damage on other things, and it just does not have a very good matchup into a lot of hazard setters, a lot of those physically defensive Pokemon that set Stealth Rocks and Spikes. So not very good. I would almost rather put it in slightly disappointing, because I think on its own it has a lot of merit, but it was a big part of the reason I wanted to make those huge transactions in the first place, because we just kept missing Rock Blast. And if you're gonna miss on a Pokemon that's so crucial to hit, or it's gonna take like 70% minimum on getting hit and return, it's just not great. So I'm gonna leave it in the fraud tier. Next up, we've got Malamar. I'm gonna put it, I would like to put it in better than expected, because I do love Terra Malamar, but I'm gonna put it in the did its job. We didn't want to drop this. I love Malamar as a Pokemon. It went 4-2. It actually had our best kill death ratio in the entire team with a 2.0, because of that one game it popped off and got 3 KOs pretty much instantly. My problem with Malamar is it's gotten power crept. It feels like a Gen 2 Pokemon. Its stat line is atrocious. I think its only stat over 100 is its attack. Its coverage is fine, you know, Psychic, Dark, Fighting, and then a smattering of Rock and Bug and Water. You know, that's all fine. It normally doesn't need more than Superpower and Knockoff anyway. Maybe Psycho Cut for the Fairies and the Fightings. But that stat line is horrific. Like, it's very similar to Bombirdier, but slower. So it's just never taking more than like 2 hits. And it takes it forever to get set up with Superpower. And then I wanted to run a set at some point this season, since it was a Terra Captain. I wanted to run Trailblaze Calm Mind with probably Terra Blast and one of its special moves, Dark Pulse, Psychic, you know, something like that. Never a good opportunity. It takes way too long for this guy to get set up, taking, you know, a ton of damage from any hit. And even if it's not a Terra Captain, it's so much worse, because then you have no resistances, you have an immunity to Psychic, and you have a 4x weakness to U-turn, which is just asking to lose to any Scarfer. It's not good. I'm sorry. I love Malamar. It's one of my favorite design Pokemon. The evolution was super unique back in Gen 6. But it is just not worth using in draft. It's so easy to prep for. Even Topsy-Turvy. Topsy-Turvy is like my favorite move of all time, and I've never even gotten to use it really that much because Malamar is just so bad. And Grapple Locked is even worse, but that's another can of worms. So yeah, not great. Next up we have Glaceon. We brought Glaceon once and it only died, but honestly it did its job in the one game we brought it. It was a 2-pointer. Glaceon sorely wants Terra, because with Terra it can be either really good defensively, or it can finally get coverage to kind of match its ice coverage. Without Terra, it's not great. It gets Freeze Dry, it gets Shadow Ball, Wish Protect. That's kind of it. It gets a couple other things here and there. Calm Mind, you know. but it's not the best Pokemon by any means. I think I brought it specifically as a counter to non-Terra Gyarados, and it did that. It did exactly what we wanted it to do. But it's just something you're never going to bring, especially without Terra, and I had other Terra options I wanted to play with, but if this was Terra, it probably would be up here. We may not have even dropped it. It was like 2 points. But yeah, not my favorite. It didn't really stand out, do anything. It was kind of just a last second pick when I wasn't sure of my Terra captains, but we ended up dropping it, so it doesn't matter. So now we're going to move on to the Pokemon we actually brought all the way to playoffs. And the first one I have here is Cobalion. And I think, to be honest, and this might be kind of weird, Cobalion, I would say, was pretty amazing. I only brought it to 4 games of the 7, and then I brought it to both of our playoffs games. And it's a little spoilers if you haven't seen finals. I should have just clicked close combat on the Cryogonal, punched it immediately for like 60-70%. And then it wouldn't have been able to get up to any shenanigans, probably. You know, there was still a chance it could have recover spanned me. But yeah, honestly, I should have just clicked buttons with this guy more often, because Cobalion is surprisingly decent in low tier, because those 90 base offenses don't hurt it as much. Because when you draft a Pokemon like Cobalion, you look at it and you're like, okay, this thing's going to be doing a lot of damage. It can set rocks, it can pivot, and like there's a lot of benefits. And then you start doing the calcs and you're like, man, this Pokemon does not do very much damage, even with like close combat. And then you see its special defense, and you're like, I'm taking a ton of damage. I'm getting one shot by non-stab, like super effective moves, without any investment, at least. If you invest in it, it's not so bad. But that's also the thing, is you can only invest in bulk or offense, right? You can't really do both. You can try, but then it's kind of a not amazing at anything Pokemon. I think I didn't use it to its full potential, and I still got a lot of work out of it. We got Calm Mind to work. We got the Adrenaline Orb set to work. It did some great work for us in playoffs. In playoffs alone, it went, well, 1 kill, 1 death. It ended up going 5-2 in 5 games, if we count regular season and playoffs. So really not bad. I think the lower power level really helps it out. That base 108 speed is really nice, and being able to switch in on dark types is a huge plus. So I like Cobalion a lot. It honestly surprised me. I think I would definitely use it again. Even outside of low tier, I think it's great support. I think it's usually just a little overpriced outside of low tier. So next we've got Regieleki. Obviously not going anywhere high. I am sad, because whenever I look at Regieleki in a vacuum, I think it's so good. It's 200 base speed. Nothing's ever coming close to outrunning it. You can outrun Scarfers with this guy easily. You've got screens, you've got spin, you've got electric moves, ancient power, and you've got some normal coverage on either side. I think the underrated version of Regieleki is the physical one. Like spamming E-Speed Wild Charge is something a lot of people don't expect, and I think, I can't remember exactly which game, but we played a Jolteon, and we did massive damage to Jolteon with Regieleki. So I think in that sense, it can really catch people off guard. The problem is ground types are so good in this game, and clearly I drafted a great water type, a great grass type, but that did not dissuade people from bringing their electrics, or wait, their grounds, sorry. And their electrics too. I think my entire division, almost everyone had an electric immune electric type. So instantly, everybody had 2 complete hard counters to Regieleki on their team. Made it really hard to use. We brought it to 4 games. I kind of brute forced it a couple of those. It went 1 kill, 2 deaths in those 4 games. That 1 kill, I'm pretty sure, was Jolteon. I don't know. I think it just, in drafts specifically, when you are countering your opponent's team, I think Regieleki is one of the easiest Pokemon to counter if it can't Terra. You give Regieleki the ability to Terra, and suddenly it is an absolute threat, which is why usually it's banned, because it's such a wide difference between if it can Terra and if it can't. So yeah, I was not a fan. I'm using it in another league right now that's not low tier, and I'm still not a fan, sadly. But I just think it's one of those things that is kind of too good to be true. That stat line is just very misleading. Next up, we've got Talonflame. I don't really know where to put it, because it was useful for me, but I expect Talonflame to do great things as a low tier. So, and I know I've used it before. I've rated it higher. I'm going to leave it in the did its job, but I'm going to put it at the top of the did its job tier, because I think Talonflame it does two things. It's offensive with like bands or just max attack, and it's tool stab and U-turn, or it's utility with defog, roost, will-o-wisp. And I don't think we used it enough, honestly. We never brought it to playoffs. We never brought Regieleki either. And I think it definitely could have played a really nice role for us in either of those games. So I think I underutilized it a bit. Maybe I had a little bit of fatigue with it because normally I don't draft the same Pokemon multiple times. But with Talonflame in particular, it's just such a splashable Pokemon. It fits on most teams because of its fantastic speed tier, access to defog, and just its coverage. A fire type that's not weak to ground as well is just very useful. So yeah, I think this was user error on my part that it's only here and not higher, but I think the battles we did bring it wasn't bad. It did exactly what we wanted it to do, but it didn't really ever shine either. And I think that's kind of the crux of Talonflame is if you 6-0 somebody with a Talonflame, they did not prep well, because it is not that hard to throw on a physically defensive water type and call it a day. But yeah, I think it's fine. Next Pokemon, Revavroom. I would put in amazing. I think these steel types absolutely stood out to me this league. I would leave it under Cobalion because it went 2-1 in 2 in the regular season, and then it went 0-2 in 2 in playoffs. I brought it a lot. I brought this thing not every battle since I picked it up, but most. Maybe because it was so fun, honestly. I love Parting Shot as a move, which you can see I had 2 Pokemon that could Parting Shot on this team. It forced so much prep with setup. Like, I think that might have been my favorite part of Revavroom, was so many people brought Mirror Herbs because they saw this thing and were like, that thing's hit shift gear, I'm going to set up on you, and then I'm going to sweep you with my Pokemon that outspeeds Revavroom and knows a ground move. So I thought it was pretty cool. Obviously, there's some things that kind of lack on this that we saw as we built. So Terra Steel Haunter just completely walls this guy out. There's nothing it can do. You could run Temper Flare, but if your opponent's team's not weak to fire, there's not a reason to throw on such a niche move. What else did we deal with? The Cryogonal, you know, we couldn't do anything against that because it took us too long to get set up, and then we didn't run poison coverage. So just a weird Pokemon in that it looks super good into certain games. I think the fact that it gets T-Spikes honestly helps it a lot, because just a lead Toxic Spike setter is so strong into a lot of teams. I just think it fits really well on most teams just because of that, and just because people have to worry about this thing getting out of control. Because it has decent resistances, even though it's super weak to ground, it's still kind of hard to take down. Filter's a good ability. Overcoat's great for certain matchups. I think Revavroom is a slept-on Pokemon. I think it should be drafted more often. I would love to find a league in the future. Maybe not a low tier, but maybe also not a standard league. I don't know if there's any like mid-tier leagues, but any that would allow this guy to be a Terra captain and not have the top of the top in the league, I think he would be super fun. So definitely planning on using him again. Next up, we have Arboliva. I had such high hopes for Arboliva because this thing's stat line is crazy, its abilities are crazy, it has amazing coverage. At the end of the day, I would put it in better than expected. We brought it to, how many games? We brought it to 4 games. It got 4 KOs and 4 deaths. Now, I think the funny part of that was all 4 of those KOs were in one game. The one where it was Assault Vest, Terra Normal, with Hyper Voice, Trailblaze. Super cool set. I loved running that. I've used Arboliva in other leagues, and I've 6-0'd someone before with the Harvest set with Subseed. It's a nasty Pokemon to go against, especially with Terra. Like, it's so annoying to deal with. Seed Sower, obviously a great ability, as is Harvest. And once again, this is a Pokemon I feel like I could have utilized more. My problem is, because this team has Primarina, people were prepping for slow special attackers. And so they were either doing fast sweepers, or they were doing very specially bulky, like AV Pokemon to deal with Primarina. And because of that, they were catching Arboliva. It works with everything except, you know, like water types. Unless we ran like Terra Electric, but we already had 2 electric types. So it was an awkward situation with Arboliva where I don't think the team we made supported Arboliva because it was a low tier Terra. I think I could have done a lot better building this team out with Arboliva in mind, picked it up early, and then built a team more around it. Put an Unburdened Sweeper in there somewhere to take advantage of grassy terrain, and then put not as many slow special attackers so that my team wasn't as easy to counter, where things could be encompassed in one setup. So I think this team was not the best team I've ever made. It was really fun. I really enjoyed prepping with this team way more than I thought I did, or than I thought I would when I was running like 3 or 4 leagues at a time. This was my favorite one to prep with, and I thought it was super fun. I wish I could have used Arboliva a little more. I kind of wish there were a couple more playoff games or something in this season. It felt so short that I missed out on some of the sets I really wanted to run. But yeah, Arboliva, not bad. Next up, we've got Eelektross. This is funny. I kind of alluded to this in one of my games. I think maybe my semifinals game. But Eelektross is one of my favorite Pokemon, like, of all time. I adored this thing back in Black and White. And then also in X and Y. This was one of the first competitive Pokemon I bred and hatched and worked all the way up. Made the Coil, Dragon Tail, Drain Punch, Thunder Punch set. I actually think I might have used Spark on it at the time for the paras. I don't even know that Spark paras more than Thunder Punch, but you know, that's beside the point. I thought it was a very cool Pokemon. No weaknesses, sounds really good to a kid, even though I wasn't exactly a kid at the time, I suppose, but I just thought it was super cool. And I think it did better than I expected. I picked it up because I didn't know what else I wanted on my team outside of a slow pivot. I didn't really want another electric type because I already had Eelektross and I had Revavroom, but Levitate, you know, we had a Pokemon off the ground, and it really helps our team to have so many Pokemon off the ground because we also have so many start ground weaknesses. We might as well make it hard on our opponents, right? So we only brought Eel to 1 game in the regular season, and it never saw the field, I don't think, or maybe it pivoted once. We brought it to both of our playoffs games, and it ended up costing us the game because we weren't running an acid spray set that I considered bringing. Instead, we were the physically attacking set that's much more standard, and that ended up biting us. If we had been the acid spray set, I think we could have 1v1 that Cryogonal. So kicking myself a little bit for that. But who knows? It's hard to tell how it would have went if that was our set, because, you know, that may have screwed us somewhere else down the line. So I'm not saying we had bad prep. I'm just saying, with hindsight being 2020, I wish I had prepped a little differently, and that's okay. But honestly, Eelektross does 2 things really well. It wears an assault vest and runs a lot of coverage moves that you have no clue why it gets them. Or it coils, it runs super Spadef to make your opponent think it's assault vest. And then it sets up to infinity, probably gets burned, and then maybe takes 1 or 2 with it before it goes down. That's kind of it. You could run Banded in a vacuum. Banded could be okay. You could run maybe another different kind of set or 2. I'm not sure. It's kind of a one-trick pony, which is funny with how much coverage it gets because it only really gets Coil as setup. But I would actually put it over the Bombird. If I had used Bombird all season, it probably would have been higher, but I did drop it, so I think Eelektross deserves to move up a little bit. Next up, we've got Flygon. Oh, Flygon. So I will give Flygon the medal for most times I made my opponent prep for a Pokemon, and then I didn't bring it. I'll put it in slightly disappointing, but it was better than Regieleki by a long shot. I would put it in did its job, but we brought Flygon to 1 game in the regular season, and I don't think we used it. It was an Agility Boom Burst set. It was 0-0 and 1. And then we brought it to semifinals, and it popped off. It got 3 KOs, special Flygon. I didn't want to bring it, ended up bringing it, and it was absolutely our key to success in that game. So with that in mind, I'm going to move Flygon up to the bottom of did its job, because it at least did what I wanted it to for 1 game this season, which is more than I can say about some other Pokemon. So we're going to give Flygon the benefit of the doubt and say if we had brought it more, it probably would have popped off. The thing was, people were already bringing Mirror Herb for my Revavroom and for other Pokemon, because I had a ton of different kinds of setup on this team between Cobalion, Calm Mind, or Swords Dance. We had Eel with Coil, Superpower Malamar at one point, Tidy Up, you know. So people were already bringing Mirror Herb, and then we have a Dragon Dance Flygon. So we never once brought physical Flygon. Not only because of that, but because most teams had at least 1, if not multiple, really good checks to either Choice Scarf, Choice Band, or Dragon Dance Flygon, which is why I only ever brought Special, because it was the only way to hit around obvious would-be checks to Flygon that people brought every single time. So if nothing else, Flygon forced prep, and I appreciate it for that. It just didn't do what I wanted it to, and it was a little disappointing, but we'll give it this because it did 3-0 in the end. Okay, next up is my most contentious pick. It's Sneasel. I have disliked this line of Pokemon for as long as I've been playing. I've never enjoyed using them. I've never enjoyed facing them. I was shocked with how often and how fun it was to bring Sneasel. Spamming knockoff from a fast Pokemon that can't be intimidated. Ice coverage from a Pokemon that can Terra out of its ice weakness. All of that, it did great coverage otherwise between Terra Blast, fighting coverage, Trailblaze, Swords Dance. This Pokemon felt so good to use. It looked so good in the builders. I brought it over Arboliva more often than not. And it ended up going 0-4 in 5 games. Sneasel never got a KO. Now, did it triple flinch a Sinistcha to win me semis? Or at least help me win semis? Yes. Unlike Flygon, I don't think that means it gets to move up to did its job. I brought this thing so much because it always had a great matchup. And it always did a little bit of damage and got KO'd as my mid-game breaker. But then it failed at breaking. And I think once again, this is a little bit of my fault in the builder. People are prepping for Swords Dance on Cobalion. People are prepping for Revavroom. You know, physical attackers with middling attacking stats. Flygon as well, Talonflame. You know, all my physical attackers weren't that strong out of the gate, other than one that we haven't talked about yet. So I think people were just kind of prepping for physical attackers that had to set up in general, and so because of that, they were always really well suited to deal with Sneasel, even when it was a Terra Captain. That's partially my fault. That's a little bit of my inexperience with using something so frail, even though the Eviolite does help it. I do think I would want to use this again in the future, which is funny because it's not up here. If it had gotten more KOs, it would be right here. But because it went 0-4, it has to go in the disappointing tier, because we bring this thing to get KOs, deal damage, go down, and then we win with something else, or we just win outright with it. And that never happened, no matter how many times I brought it. So yeah, I wish it was better. It was definitely user error. But yeah, I don't know. Sneasel's in a weird place for me. So my last two, one of these obviously has to be MVP, right? So is it the consistent, or is it the one that took forever to pop off? And you already know, Primarina, I have to give MVP. So many times we brought it and it went 2-1, 3-1, 3-0, 4-0. Primarina is disgustingly strong in low tier. Like, this thing is making a comeback. It was not really that good in Gen 7. Gen 8, I think it definitely did have a niche, but something about Gen 9, Flip Turn, Psychic Noise, and just the way of the meta has made Primarina absolutely pop off this generation. And I don't even know that it should have been in low tier. Like, it was so good. It was so strong. Most things couldn't take two from it. Had really nice tools in its disposal. There was things like Throat Spray, but it could be defensive. It could be Assault Vest. It could be Boots. You could run Resist Berries and then just get KOs on things that you have no right KOing. So yeah, I think of all these Pokemon, Primarina was easily the most consistent. And it's funny because I didn't bring it to 2 of my regular season games and 1 of my playoff games, which both of those were the same matchup against Grum. Grum's team was incredibly anti-Primarina with that Volcanion. So yeah, I couldn't really justify it there. That's not to say Primarina's bad in any way. Primarina forced a ton of electric types into our team. Like, look at our team and look at what's weak to electric. We have, on our final team, it was just Primarina and Talonflame, unless I'm missing something obvious. And I think Grum had 4 or 5 electric coverage moves on its entire team just to deal with Primarina. Like, that is crazy. That is a great Pokemon because it forces so much prep on its own. And I think a big part of how I got it was I got the wheel pick in this draft league, and I got Primarina Ceruledge because I wanted a strong physical attacker and a strong special attacker, because my drafts are always too passive, and I wanted to change that. And that ended up obviously being the case because both of these guys ended up with 11 KOs, but Primarina ended with 3 deaths. Ceruledge ended with 7. Now with Ceruledge, it is obviously amazing. Easily my number 2. So I'm glad to see at least my top 3 picks, or 3 of my top picks, ended up here. I think my other 2 were Flygon, Eelektross. Ceruledge is disgustingly strong. I know I say that probably too much, but just the fact that you can Sword Stance with a Sash, be down 2-5, and clean an entire game if your opponent doesn't pop your Sash while you're setting up is so good. I don't care if it's a one-trick pony. I don't care if every time I bring it, it's going to have Bitter Blade. It's probably going to have a ghost move, either Poltergeist or Shadow Sneak. It's probably going to have Close Combat, and then it's going to have something between Sword Stance, Bulk Up, Taunt, Flame Charge, Destiny Bond. And that's the set, you know, that's everything this guy has to offer. That's totally fine with me. That's all it ever needs to do, because that alone forces so much prep, and if people don't prep for it, you're going to blow through the entire team. So yeah, Ceruledge was absolutely fantastic as a Pokemon. Ceruledge and Primarina, use them in low tier, draft them round 1. You will not be disappointed. Draft a team that is good for them. Maybe, I don't always advocate webs, but my team was not exactly threatening a lot of hazards. I don't know that people ever really brought that much removal versus me. So maybe if you could find a slot for a websmon on here somewhere, definitely try that. Otherwise, yeah, this was the team. Primarina, clearly a fantastic Pokemon. Probably, it was our second highest KD ratio with 1.8, behind Malamar, of course. So yeah, if I were to rebuild this team, I would actually keep the top 4 listed here. I would keep the top 7, let's just say that. I would keep everything that was at least better than expected, because I would like to give Arboliva another chance. I would definitely keep Bombirdier on the new team. I think it could do really well with this team. And then I think all the things from Dittish Job and below, I would not really get again. I would grab new Pokemon that I hadn't tried before that synergize with the team. But overall, it was a really fun season. I'm finding that I am super, super burnt out on standard format. I think Scarlet Violet format is just not synergistic with how I like to play, which is slow, methodical, figure out what your opponent's doing. Scarlet Violet's very hyper offensive, and the low tier is no exception. So I think, yeah, it's just not my play style. I'm hoping Gen 10 might open up a little more bulk to come back. I don't want Stall to make a huge comeback, but I would just like to see a slower, more methodical metagame in the future. But maybe that's just me. So yeah, if you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, let me know what you think of these Pokemon, what you think I could have drafted to make this team better. Maybe to have saved my finals run, something that beats an Iron Defense Cryogonal, which honestly, once it gets set up, I don't know that there are that many things that can, other than, you know, Pokemon that don't mind taking ice and electric coverage. But yeah, I'm getting off the point. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you next time.